Welcome to the Podkey summary of Objections to Evolution. Today's catch-up is about evolution, and more specifically, the arguments around it that keep resurfacing in science, religion, and public life. The short version is that evolutionary theory did face real scientific criticism early on, but it survived because it kept making testable predictions, and the evidence kept piling up from fossils, genetics, and direct observation. A lot of the confusion now comes from mixing up definitions, mixing evolution with the origin of life or the universe, and treating political or religious controversy as if it were the same thing as scientific controversy. One useful bit of history here is that Darwin's ideas were not instantly and universally accepted, even by scientists who weren't religiously opposed to them. From the late 1800s into the early 1900s, natural selection had rivals like Lamarckism, orthogenesis, saltationism, and catastrophism. And people also worried Darwin didn't have a solid mechanism for heredity. That stretch is often called the eclipse of Darwinism, and it matters because it shows science doing what science does, arguing over mechanisms, testing alternatives, and correcting itself. A great example is Lord Kelvin's estimate that Earth was only tens to hundreds of millions of years old, which seemed way too short for slow, gradual evolution. Once radioactive dating came along, Earth turned out to be billions of years old, and that objection basically collapsed. By the 1930s and 40s, Mendelian genetics and the modern evolutionary synthesis brought the pieces together, and among mainstream biologists, evolution stopped being the live scientific controversy. People sometimes imagine it still is. A lot of modern anti-evolution argument works by leaning on the everyday meaning of words instead of the scientific one. In regular conversation, theory can mean a hunch. In science, a theory is a deeply tested explanatory framework. Proof is another one. Science usually deals in evidence, testing, and degrees of confidence, not absolute mathematical style proof. And evolution itself gets stretched way beyond its lane. In biology, it means changes in populations over time. It does not automatically mean the origin of the universe, the origin of the first life, or a complete answer to the meaning of existence, which is a fairly ambitious job description for one field. There's also a persistent idea that evolution means progress towards something higher or more complex. Biologically, that's just not how it works. Evolution isn't aiming at humans like we're the final boss of nature. One reason evolution is taken seriously in science is that it's falsifiable in principle. J.B. Haldane's famous joke was that fossil rabbits in the Precambrian would be a real problem, because the order of life in the rock record is one of the things the theory predicts. The same goes for genetics. Common descent predicts specific family relationships among species, and those predictions have been tested over and over. Humans and chimpanzees share roughly 95 to 99.4% of their DNA, depending on how you measure it, and human chromosome 2 carries the remnants of an ancient fusion event that common descent predicted. That's important because it's not just reading stories into fossils after the fact. It's independent evidence landing in the same place. And evolution is not only inferred from deep time. We've watched genetic change in fruit flies, mice, and bacteria, watched antibiotic resistance evolve, and documented cases of speciation in the field. So biologists don't treat macroevolution as some totally separate magical category. They see it as the long-run extension of processes we can observe directly. Darwin openly admitted the fossil record looked patchy, and at the time that was a serious difficulty. What changed is that the record got much richer. Archaeopteryx shows a mix of bird and non-avian dinosaur traits, and Tiktaalik links fish-like ancestors with limbed vertebrates. That doesn't mean every transition is preserved in perfect cinematic detail. Fossilization is rare, and the record is uneven. Punctuated equilibrium also helps explain why lineages can look stable for long stretches and then change relatively quickly in geological terms. The Cambrian diversification is still a real research question, but the ideas on the table involve things like oxygen levels, ecology, developmental changes, and environment, not a scientific need to insert supernatural intervention. And fossils aren't standing alone anyway. Genomic phylogenetic trees create their own nested pattern of relationships, and multiple dating methods can cross-check each other rather than leaning on one circular trick. The watchmaker argument, and later intelligent design, says living systems look too ordered or complex to have arisen naturally. The key reply from evolutionary biology is that natural selection is not pure chance. Variation may be random, but survival and reproduction are filtered in a non-random way. Michael Behe's irreducible complexity argument pointed to things like the bacterial flagellum, the blood-clotting cascade, and the immune system as systems that supposedly couldn't work in simpler stages. But evolution has several ways to build complexity, step by step, including exaptation, scaffolding, gene duplication, and modification of parts that originally did something else. Research on the flagellum in particular has weakened the claim that it's an impossible evolutionary structure. The complaint that evolution can't create new information runs into observed cases of innovation too, including nylon-eating bacteria that evolved enzymes for digesting a synthetic material that only showed up in the modern era. And then there's the thermodynamics objection, which sounds technical but usually boils down to treating Earth like a sealed box. It isn't. Life constantly exchanges energy and matter with its surroundings, and the sun keeps pouring energy into the system. So local increases in order are perfectly compatible with the second law of thermodynamics. That's true in biology, and honestly in ordinary physics too. Ice crystals form without anyone filing a miracle report. In the public arena, the strategy shifted over time from banning evolution outright to presenting creationism or intelligent design as a scientific alternative, often under slogans like "Teach the Controversy." The Discovery Institute's wedge strategy was quite explicit about wanting to challenge materialist science and move toward a framework compatible with Christian theism. U.S. courts have repeatedly said public school science classes are not supposed to balance religious commitments against scientific evidence. Epperson v. Arkansas in 1968 struck down bans on teaching evolution that were grounded in religion, and later cases rejected creationism and intelligent design as science for classroom purposes. That's a big distinction. Science does not decide truth by counting how many people object, or by giving equal time to claims that don't offer testable mechanisms. It's also worth saying plainly that opposition to evolution is not universal among religious believers. Many Protestants moved toward forms of Christian evolution. The Catholic Church gradually accepted inquiry into human evolution, and Pope John Paul II called evolution more than a hypothesis in 1996. Pope Benedict XVI emphasized that evolution doesn't require people to see human life as meaningless, and Islamic views also range from literal creationism to guided or theistic evolution, even though acceptance is lower in many Muslim societies. Polling complicates the idea that evolution automatically equals atheism. One survey found 70% of Americans thought evolution was compatible with belief in God, and a Nature survey reported that about 40% of American scientists accepted both evolution and an active deity. Then there's the moral argument, where evolution gets blamed for everything from eugenics to Nazism to general social collapse. That's an appeal to consequences. Even if a theory had ugly social uses, that would not tell you whether the underlying biology is true. Historians also distinguish Darwin's descriptive account of natural selection from social Darwinism's claim that human beings ought to imitate struggle in nature. And the claim that Darwin caused Hitler's crimes is widely condemned as a distortion of history. Anti-Semitism and the ideological roots of Nazism did not begin with evolutionary biology and can't be reduced to it. So the clearest takeaway is that evolution remains strong in science because it keeps surviving tests, not because it dodges them. The debates that still feel hottest in public life are often really about definitions, religion, education, or politics, which are important topics, just different ones. And if a conversation about fossils somehow ends up covering thermodynamics, chromosome fusion, and the Establishment Clause, at least you know it's been a lively one. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.